Okay. So we are here today to record and share because I think that this last 4 or 5 months for me has been one of the most probably um, intense and transformational healing times of my life. And I have had many times of healing, of illness, of you know, kind of making it through really, big physical shifts and changes that are happening in the body. And these last 4 months for me have been just like wildly transformative. And I really felt the pull just last week to share a lot more about it. And I think, Megan, you and I share a lot about ourselves and our own process when, on our Instagram lives or stories or with clients and things like that. Because I think it's really important to be able to, to show that like we are also in process with the work that we're doing and the work that we're wanting to share with other people in the world. And so I've shared a little bit about kind of what's been going on, but really, truly, these last 4 months have been like just really powerful. And I was at a session with a practitioner of mine maybe a month ago when I was like really in the thick of it with fevers. And I'm going to talk more about what specifically has been going on. But we were kind of talking and she was like, well, what's been helping you to, kind of move through this? And as I was sharing, I was realizing that like I have a lot of tools, and I have a lot of ways I think about things that have helped me to navigate really, really treacherous times. And as I was sharing it out loud with her, she was kind of reflecting back too, like that's really helpful, and to me, sometimes I don't even think about it necessarily. But my whole goal, or when I'm going through things like this, there's like a part of me that's going through it. And then there's a part of me that really, really wants to like alchemize to get gold out of a really tough experience, and to be able to share it in hopes that even if it just helps like one person to be like, oh, that makes sense for me, or that helps me see something differently. Cool. Like that's, what I really care about. And I think like for me, I've really over time come to see illness, and I mean, definitely any kind of really tough experience, but illness specifically, kind of what I'm talking about today, as an invitation and an initiation that can really help uncover different parts of ourselves and help to kind of alchemize and bring out this gold. And so that's my goal in sharing that. And I think, for me, being someone that got really, really sick when I was younger, like around 18 years old, I really had to get to the point where I, instead of, seeing that experience or illness as something like, oh, I lost the lottery, or like I drew some bad genetic cards, or, something like this happened to me. That's just, that's just how it goes. And this is something I'm going to suffer with for the rest of my life. Instead, just being able to, at that younger age, try and put it into context of, this is something that's happening to me that I can make something out of, and that can help me understand myself even more and help me develop as a person. And so being able to cultivate kind of a healing mindset around it has been really, really key. And one thing I want to highlight here is that there's a difference between understanding that things like illness or traumas or really difficult things in life can be things that can ultimately help us grow as people, versus this kind of idea that, well, if this is happening to you, it's because somehow you've like drawn it into your life, or, because, you have symptoms, there's something that you're missing. Like there's something you've not yet figured out or learned in your life, or you haven't, processed it, or like this is something that you've attracted to yourself, or like it's a very different minds. Like that is a little bit more reductive of, you've drawn that into yourself, and it's a reflection of something you need to fix, versus life is mysterious, and life is going to serve us lots of different curveballs. And when we are served things like illness or, big hardships, what are the tools, what's the mindset, what are the framework that we can use to help us navigate that, to survive. Sometimes it's just survive, but B, sometimes come out the other side with a deeper understanding of ourselves and some other gifts too. So I just wanted to frame it like that. And what I'm going to share today is 3 lessons that have come to me through this process, and then also 3 practices that can be really helpful in doing that. Mm-hmm. And Megan's going to be here too, because it's way more fun to have a conversation and not just listen to me talk.
It is so fun to listen to you talk. I don't know what you're talking about.
No, I'm realizing that in everything, just having conversation, relation, and, you have your own personal experience that's different than mine in terms of this as well. And so I think if we can kind of bring that together to hopefully this is helpful for someone going through this.
I do want to say too, one of our like core values here at the Slow Medicine Collective is to bring the realness in what it is to be a human trying to heal. And I think a lot of times, especially in the wellness world, books are written, or there's this level of, I would say, toxic positivity of like, if you eat an autoimmune diet for 8 weeks, it's going to push you into remission and you'll be all better. But what's missing is the human experience of actually like sometimes we have flares. Sometimes things come up, sometimes triggers come up, and we might dip back into a flare for a time. And I feel like that realness is missing in a lot of what is shared. So what you're bringing forward today, Christina, I think is really, really powerful, because it's bringing a human experience into this world of, where, and I'm not saying that like inspiration isn't important, because yes, that's also part of it, but there's also just a realness that I feel like you can bring that is, and that we can bring, that's incredibly needed and is very powerful, and invites the journey of what it is to heal, as opposed to being told what the destination is. Being told the destination is you completely heal, which is not really possible, your autoimmune condition. That's where you're trying to get. Whereas the journey, inviting a journey is, just because you're in a flare doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. Just because you're in a flare doesn't mean your body is broken. It's all information. And what I've experienced with you over the last 4 months is it's been hard, but it's also, you've looked at it as, okay, here's an opportunity to experiment and experience this type of healing.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because that's exactly what it is realizing, sometimes it seems like there's only one destination, and that destination is to completely get rid of your symptoms. And if you haven't done that, then you've missed something. Something is still wrong with you, or, in that essence of flares, or things being, cyclical, or things coming back to us again. It's this like feeling of, oh my gosh, I thought I was done with this. Like I didn't think I needed this anymore, from a physical level, spiritual level, all of it. Like I thought I was done with this. And when things come back, it can be devastating, because it can feel like, oh my gosh, what have I done wrong? What have I done wrong here? And what I really, really want to impart today is that, what you said about the journey of it. Like, we always hear that healing's a journey and healing's a process. And I think it's just so true how much it is. And if we can find ways to be in the process that's more like a flow, that we can go with the flow of that process and trust a little bit where it's trying to take us. And if we can have tools to stay afloat in that flow, because trust me, like sometimes it feels like you are being completely pulled under and annihilated. And what I really want to share for people is what are the tools that can help keep you afloat on the journey, because the journey is not easy sometimes. And just like you're saying, we're so hyper focused on the destination, and I need to get into it with my symptoms and everything so I can share more about like exactly that too. But that I was very hyper focused on that as well. And it's just permission to be in the journey. So the journey, so for me, where really these last 4 months or so really started was like, I haven't dealt with autoimmune flares in probably like 5 years. I think it had been since I had a fever flare. And for me, this all started when I was 18 years old. I was actually 17, but and I got these huge fevers and this big flare up and this huge immune response that happened around that time. And it came seemingly out of nowhere then. So it was this experience, as illness often is, of like, you're going along with your life, you're going down one path and something happens and it completely creates this like chasm between where you were going and what you thought was happening and then what comes after that. So for me, it was this really big event. And since then, the way that it has shown up for me is in flares of fevers. And I've gotten a diagnosis of something called adult onset Still's disease. That has been a diagnosis. It hasn't quite always fit everything. I've also gotten a diagnosis of chronic Lyme. That has been part of, a journey as well. But for me, what it comes as these huge fevers, these like shaking chills, and then these big fevers that happen overnight, and these big sweats, and this huge autoinflammatory response, which is essentially like a massive cytokine storm that happens in my body. And once it gets triggered, it kind of builds to this crescendo of just complete immune activation, like redness and swelling, and fever is the biggest hallmark of it. So you can't ignore it. It is, it's not like, I can walk around and be like, oh, my head kind of hurts, or this kind of, it's really big and really obvious. And my fevers have been so interesting. If I really look throughout my life at the different times that they have come up and where they have led me or steered me to or away from, when I'm looking back, it's really, really interesting and curious. But they've been something that have been with me. And then I'll go for periods of time where I don't have any fevers. I don't have symptoms. Like, if you looked at me, you would never know I had, an autoimmune condition or anything like that. So, and over that time, I have done all the things to heal and support my body, from, functional medicine, nutrition, Chinese medicine, herbal medicine, shamanism, like plant medicine, all the things, that have really supported me over time and also have helped me in my own practice with clients too. But up until October of this year, I hadn't had fevers in about 5 years or so. They just weren't even really on my radar. I had to do a lot of, other things to care for my body and support my body. But in October, I had a miscarriage. And for me, that was the first time my body had ever been pregnant. So that was a big change and a big thing, that my body had never done that before. And when I had the miscarriage, it was really like a big physical event. Like, it was a really big event. And And it was very surprising and very like, yeah, like a shock to the system, I think is really what it was. And in the wake of that, it was brand new experience for me. And like, how do I, okay, this is not something I've experienced before. Like, how do I support my body and my mind and myself through this? And it's actually not something I've shared with very many people, not even like all, just a handful of people, not because of any sort of like shame around having a miscarriage or anything like that, but more so around it was such a process, and I could feel this is a process that to go I need to go through to just kind of orient myself and figure out how this is affecting me and how to move through this process. So it's not something I've shared with a lot of people, but for me, it was really interesting to notice how I reacted and responded to that event. And then a few weeks after I had the miscarriage, kind of coinciding with my next cycle, I got my fevers. And they came after a day where I tried to like paint our house, like a room in our house. Like I was like, this will be a good thing I have energy to do this. Um, and I just started to feel like, oh man, I don't feel so good. Like something's really not right in my body. I don't feel so good. And I got fevers that night. And I just remember being devastated. Like, because the fevers, like anyone that's dealt with autoimmune issues, when a symptom comes back, it floods back to you of the very worst time that you had that symptom and that you went to the hospital, or, all these things happened. And it's just this huge event. And so having the fevers, then I was like, okay, on top of all of this, now this is happening. And so for me, I know now that the shift in hormones and many other things kind of contributed to having that and having the flares. But since having those fevers, and I'm going to kind of talk a little bit more about each kind of flare I've had in the context of it. Since then, I have been dealing with these fevers off and on and being able to kind of quiet the flare and then it coming back, and then quieting and it coming back. And the best way I can describe that it's felt is like when you're in the ocean and you get kind of caught off guard by waves and they like smash you, and then you kind of come up and you're like, and you're up for air, and then you get yanked back again and smashed again. And that has happened for me like every couple weeks. It's felt like since then where I felt, okay, I'm good. And then another kind of wave coming to finally the point about 3 weeks ago, maybe, of the experience or feeling like I fully just got crushed by a wave, like mouthful of sand crushed by a wave, like with fevers. And it was like, you need to fully surrender and be with this. And I think that process of fully surrendering and actually being with it and allowing myself to be sick or to be unwell or to just really be with the process by myself going through it has really created a lot of awareness, insight, and understanding and transformation that I wasn't even aware of. So that has been kind of the general overview. And I would love to share some of the kind of main lessons that have come from that, but I'm just going to stop there for a second.
I think one of the big things we talked about, and I can't remember how we phrased it, that it was, how do we let your body guide and your mind, and like allow your mind to kind of quiet and move more into this body, and also the subtle energies. And I'm sure you're going to share some about this, but in the essence of the pause, and before you go into the things that you learned, just what I got to witness with you was this transformative and this was all your brain, this was you really going into your experience as opposed to trying to just like push it away. I think that there's, especially, I know for me and with medical trauma, there's always a like, oh my God, I don't want this. Like, I just want to push it away. This is like, this might be like it was last time. Or, um, there's all kinds of what ifs, whether it's like, what if I can't come out of it? What if I land in the hospital again? What if I have to have another organ removed? And one thing I really witnessed with you, Christina, is you went in and you allowed yourself to go in and get curious about, okay, like this is happening. It's brutal. And I'm eating sand and having waves crush me. And at the same time, I know how to spit the sand out and breathe through it. So I just want to reflect that as, someone who's kind of been by your side while you've gone through this.
I appreciate that reflection too. And appreciate, just your insight and support through it too. And I think that's the thing, is like being able to cultivate that mindset of what's happening when this is happening. So that has saved me. Because being able to see, okay, I got a flare, and as opposed to I did something wrong, which my brain still goes there, I did something wrong. But I should have healed this. I was done with those things. I could see, wow, there was a really, really big event that really shifted my physiology, but also it forced me into looking at a lot of different things that I hadn't, maladaptive patterns that that I've been, I'm going to share a little bit more, but like it forced me into looking deeply at things that I wasn't really looking at. And so to be able to have that almost curious mindset, even when you're being like annihilated and like, don't get me wrong, I was feeling shitty, and all I want to do is get out of symptoms. Like it is bad when I have those fevers. Like it is not, I mean, I take medication, I take prednisone because I have to take care of my body and, physical body.
To use your words, one of the things you said multiple times, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but you would say, I literally feel like I'm burning from the inside out.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And that's why when I was writing this down, I was writing like some lessons, and I was writing them as like lessons from the fire, because I was like, I have been burnt. It's burning. My experience is my whole body is burning. And it is like, you do not want to be in the body when that is happening. So like the first lesson for me that came so strong is that dissociation is really tricky. And I think we often think of dissociation as like we just completely leave our body if we have some kind of trauma or something like that. In my experience, yes, that's totally true. And I've been in places with like medical trauma where I've, when the body is like burning up with fever, like you don't want to be in the body. You want to float above it. You want to leave it and not be there. But what I noticed this time very clearly is that when I had the miscarriage, actually, which was its own kind of like traumatic event, or event. And then when I had fevers, I completely detached my mind from my body. And it is so tricky because I still look like I am really caring for myself and I'm in my body. And what that looks like was literally, I was giving myself like Ayurvedic oil massages. I was like eating ghee and making beautiful food for myself to support my womb, after that experience, like taking all the supplements, I was seeing different practitioners supporting myself. But there is a chasm that happens where the way I experience it is my mind detaches from my body. And I literally was in a session with a practitioner of mine who's like a craniosacral and more kind of energy practitioner. And she was like, I just saw it. I saw what happened. Like in a visual, your head just detaches from your body. And why it does that. And that's something I realized I've been doing since I was 17, where the body is falling apart, feels like failing, not doing what it's supposed to be doing, is in a lot of distress. The mind is still very sharp, is still there. And the mind, above all else, just wants to keep going, right? It doesn't want to fall into victimhood. It doesn't want to fall into being sick. It doesn't want to stop, And for me, my coping for that, or my disassociation for that, was detaching my mind and my body, getting my mind to go and just to almost like drag my body along. In this case, it was very tricky because I was technically doing all the quote unquote right things to support my body, caring for my body, all of this, but it was the experience of my mind knowing what to do for my body. It doesn't help that this is literally my profession and like I know all the things to do. My mind literally caring for my body, but there was a really big chasm, split, disconnect that happened between my mind and my body. And a huge part of coming back into balance for me has been and is mending that split. But with disassociation, we can't start to mend until we're actually aware that we're doing that. It's interesting because I know when we were talking about the mind body, and it was literally like talking about like my head, like my neck being like longer, like it was so funny. I was thinking about like I used to work in bars and restaurants and stuff, and I used to have people comment all the time on what great posture I had. Like that I people used to be like, "Oh, were you a dancer?" I was absolutely not a dancer. Like, "Were you a dancer? Like you have this really good posture, like always holding yourself like this." I literally think I was just, my head was trying to break free from my body. So
You're like
my
a
neck
giraffe in a
and
past
posture.
life.
Yes. Like I had a little laugh about it because I was like, it's just so funny. So that's my first insight. And what I want to share is that disassociation is really tricky. And I don't know if you have thoughts around that, Megan, as well.
No, none.
None.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts around dissociation, but I think, dissociation actually serves us at times. And my relationship with dissociation is different than what yours is, as everybody's is. My dissociation comes from my complex PTSD and my very, very traumatic childhood. And the only way I survived my childhood was to dissociate. And part of my healing, my physical body at this point, my path with that has to come back into my body. And one of my practitioners at one time said to me, you can't heal a body unless you're in a body. And I do agree with that, but I also feel like that's a little bit like there's a feeling of hopelessness, because if getting into the body feels hard and scary, because how it's literally become a way of survival, in the same way for you, where it's like your brain knows what to do. And it's like bringing that back on. I almost sometimes wonder for you if it's like, oh my God, but then I'm going to have to do all those things that this brilliant brain of yours holds. And, it's like, what's the pathway around and to moving back into your body? And again, that's so bio-individual. And I also just want to say too, this is why I feel like, the practitioners that we work with in our mentorship mostly are people who are themselves dealing with some kind of chronic illness, whether it be a chronic autoimmune condition or a chronic, just a chronic health issue. Because so much of what, as practitioners, we do know what to do, but it's how do we implement and how do we bring ourselves back down to earth to be able to know what our tools are. And dissociation is helpful and harmful. And that's why it's incredibly, incredibly, incredibly hard. And the thing is, you know, the path to being in your body is like this, it's up and down. And I don't actually know that we ever are fully in our bodies all the time.
Yeah.
And I've stopped telling myself that that is what I need in order to heal. It's more the noticing, oh, I'm in a completely dissociated state, having compassion for that, bringing compassion and awareness to that. And then from that place, moving into the, what do I need? And I think that's similar for you too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, because to me, healing is about integration, and integration is about bringing together pieces of a whole. I think that we are whole, but there are parts of ourselves that we've either disassociated from, shut off, quieted, for all these very, very good reasons. And to me, when we can be in a healing journey like this, we start to be able to bring back these parts of ourselves. They kind of like light up, or connections are made. And that's the journey, that's the process. And by rushing to the end of the process, which is something I have done too, we actually miss out on the process of integration, of healing, of these pieces. And I like what you're saying. It's like, yeah, we don't need permission to be these like fully embodied all the time, whatever. Like, we're going to come in and out, but it's so tricky how it's so tricky to notice, because I would have told you, yeah, I'm not disassociated. Like, I'm not, I'm in my body, and I would have told you those things. And now I could see so clearly what happened. And I have a lot of clients who we have these similar conversations with too. So the second piece that is kind of coming off of this too, that was a big lesson for me personally, is that healing harder is not the answer. And that's something I've been working with for a long time, and something I share with a lot of clients. But, it isn't until sometimes things really land and hit you over the head that it's like, healing harder is not the answer. What I mean by that is, I think sometimes healing harder comes from this tricky disassociation that we might have. So the experience for me of when, I got the fever, I started to get the fevers. I started to get into this like, oh my God, no. I haven't had this forever. I can't have this. What's going on? Meanwhile, my brain is kind of detached from my body, and my brain is like, okay, we need to figure out histamine. We need to figure out, what's going on with the gut. We need to figure out, the brain starts to go down all these different pathways. And what it starts to look like is healing really hard. Like, the energy of it was like, I was like, okay, let me do all the things. And that was literally like, I've got my castor oil pack going. I'm going to the sauna because my liver labs were a little elevated. Like, I know I got to sweat it out. I'm going to make sure I'm on all these different supplements. Literally dove into a histamine diet too, which is really, really hard diet to do. On top of it, drinking teas to support like womb healing, doing acupuncture, like all the things, right? And that comes from this like sweet place of just wanting to get better, because these symptoms are terrible. And it's so hard to function, to survive, to work when I have these symptoms. So it's this desire to get out of it. But it was also, so I like rushed into the healing, right? Of like, I'm going to heal so hard that this thing won't even have a chance. And in the past, that sometimes worked for me, actually. But this time it didn't. And I started to feel like, okay, I got a little bit better. I could come down on the medications, all of this. And then I got hit again with another flare in my next period. And the biggest thing for me, and the message that kept coming through, was don't try so hard. Like, you're trying so hard. And that can be a hard pill to swallow when we just want to get better. We want to absorb all the information we can. We want to do all the things we can. But a lot of that stems from not being actually connected to the process that's going on with the body, and really seeing that this is the moment where we start to bring in some of like what we're calling slow medicine, which doesn't mean that we're slow to get rid of symptoms or we're slow to heal or anything like that. It actually just means we can rest into the process a little bit. And so for me, that really, really looked like saying like, whoa, like just stop for a second, put all of these things down, take a breath, and really just check in on what is the body needing right now? Like what is going on? And what the body is needing is so much more simple than often we make it out to be. I could talk about this for a lot longer, but I kind of want to stop there with it. But I know a lot of people understand this feeling of like healing harder. And it's just become so clear to me that even if we are really sick, healing harder and forcing this kind of healing or rushing to the end can actually end up being more harmful for us.
Yeah, it made it worse for you for a little while there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to come in with an analogy because I love analogies. And this is one I used for you or with you probably a long time ago, actually. But one of the ways that I'll talk to people who are in an autoimmune flare or who are in any kind of situation, whether it's chronic or cancer or whatever is happening for them, is it's like they're being swept down a really fast river. And it's big. It's like a big swollen northwest after a giant rainstorm type river. And there's rocks and rapids, and people are just trying to grab a hold of anything. And a lot of these interventions, like the histamine diet or whatever it might be, a lot of them are oftentimes twigs, where it's like you think you grab a hold of it, but the river and the symptoms are so strong that those twigs just break pretty instantly. Like they might hold you for a second, but then they break and you're swept even further, and it's even faster. And what ideally we're wanting to do with slow medicine is, how do we find that like really solid root, like that's not a twig, but it's so deeply ingrained where you can like actually start to kind of pull yourself out of the current, so that then you can pick and choose the twigs that you're going to work with. And oftentimes what that root is that we need to grab a hold of is not actually really found in functional medicine and functional nutrition. It's completely different. And I think that was what you were experiencing, as you were grasping at twigs but then you found your root. You were able to really like grab a hold and pull yourself out.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And sometimes the root is actually just like surrender into rest. And it's not what we want to hear. Trust me. Like if anyone is listening to this and they're not feeling well and they're sick, like I know, like I know. And you don't ever want to hear like that it's like surrendering into it or what, but surrender is one of the most important steps in being able to fully move through a healing process. And I find we fight a lot to not surrender into it because surrender is scary. What if I get worse? What if I never come out of this? What if, all these different fears we have. So we float above the surface a little, not fully surrendering. And for me, I think a big root is like, this is happening right now. Sit down, lay in your bed, cancel things for a week, and be with what is. And that is a hard pill to swallow when you don't feel good. It is so hard, but I will tell you that is what shifted the tides for me this time.
She fought a lot. She really
I
didn't want
fought, I
to. She did.
flailed.
I wouldn't say you flailed, but you were like,
Oh, I flailed.
no.
No, I know, because there's a part of you that's like, I refuse to have this happen to me again. Have I like, no, 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 no. Surrender, 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 surrender. I even, I had a client who was dealing with autoimmune issues and was in the middle of a flare. And she was, not feeling like she was getting better. And then she got a cold on top of the flare. And after I talked to her as she moved through the cold, I'm like, how are you doing? And she was like, actually, I'm way better and my flare is done like 3 days after the cold. And I was like, okay, tell me, let's explore that. Tell me more about it. And what, we came to understand was that the cold gave her permission to surrender, because it was like, she was able to cancel her class. She emailed her teacher. She, couldn't go out one evening because she had a cold, because it's a socially acceptable kind of thing, to have. When you have a cold, you rest, you eat soup, you take care of yourself. Like, that's okay. So the cold allowed her to surrender, and the surrender made her flare go away. And that in and of itself is really powerful. So sometimes that big old root is surrender. There's a lot of other things I can say about the root too. So if anyone is curious about this, message me. But yeah, that's one of the biggest pieces. And I think that the third sort of insight, that came for me around it, and I'm going to talk more about the practices too, just a few simple practices you can use, is that, if we have this healing mindset, like I talked a bit about at the beginning, that can help us move through this process, we're actually able to access the deep healing that's available to us when we surrender. And that is what happened. It is currently happening. I'm very much like in process still as I'm sharing this. Like, it's not like I'm like, I figured it all out. But when we can surrender into that, and when we have the tools and a mindset that can keep us buoyant enough to move through it, we can start to see all the, essentially the teachings, the learnings, the integrations, the deep healing that sometimes our illness or symptoms are calling us into. And that is something I can also talk about for like another hour, about how to actually cultivate this healing mindset. But I just really wanted to, in this moment, introduce that idea and concept. Actually even I want to read a little something quickly. So there's this book called The Healing Attitude by Monica Canducci that has been helpful. There's one of like the greatest gifts of my life is like, at any time I'm going through difficult things, like random books and things and teachers just come to me always without fail. Like someone will send me something in the mail and it's like the exact perfect thing I need, anyway. But she says here that how many times have I heard someone say, there's still something that I didn't understand. Otherwise, I would have healed and gotten rid of my symptoms. Maybe, but maybe not. It's not just, or not always, a matter of understanding. It's true that very often our body enacts and manifests in the form of symptoms, some dynamics belonging to the emotional realm and some that we're not even aware of. Emotional distress and traumatic events can literally be translated by our body and turned into symptoms, which we know about. But instead of blaming or judging yourself for something that you did or didn't do, that you understood or didn't, or for not being able to heal, or for deserving or not deserving healing, you can instead embrace a paradigm shift. Start thinking that healing is above all an attitude, a mindset, and a journey aimed at the unveiling, acknowledging, and expressing of our true nature and self. So that for me is really helpful in understanding that there's a certain way that we can start to think about these things that are happening to us so that we can alchemize them, so that they can become something that doesn't pull us down, but can actually lead us to more integration and wholeness of ourselves. So those are some of them at this point in time, some of the main insights and lessons coming through here. And again, I can elaborate and probably will on several of them. And then I want to share like 3 practices as well. Because tools, Megan and I are really into tools.
We are tools and tool belts, man. It's what life's all about.
Yeah. And I will tell you, if I didn't have very clear tools, during these last few months, especially the last month, I don't know where I would have been. You know, like it's really, I just am like, so if I can impart some of this and it can help, that's what I want to do. So the first practice that I encourage is if you are going through a challenging time like this or dealing with symptoms, or even if you're not, but especially if you are, is carrying around a journal with you. I have this little journal and I literally like carry it. The last few weeks or the last even couple months, just carry it around with me and think of it. The phrase that comes to me in my mind when I'm working with this is like, I am a student of life. So if we can start to see that even when we are knocked down and horrible things are happening, or physically, or maybe our body feels like it's not okay, if we can just continually think, what am I learning? What are the things that are coming forward for me? What is coming up for me? And just write them down. Even if you think that it's small or insignificant or just things you're noticing, write it down. And it is like a treasure hunt almost. Like I can even go to a few, places that I'm just looking here for me, like, yeah, for instance, like I wrote down lesson. When I start to feel better, look at the quality of my mind. When it starts to race, it's pulling away from the body. Okay, so that was just like one thought I had throughout the day, and I wrote it down. And you'll start to find that gold comes through, wisdom comes through, even when you're in the midst of really deep challenge, and think of it like a treasure hunt. So that's one practice I offer. The other practice is tuning in a little longer and a little deeper. And what I mean by that is when you are waking up in the morning and you're like splashing water on your face, stay with that sensation of the water just a little longer, a little deeper than you normally would. Or when you're eating, can you sit outside for a second and just stay with that moment a little longer and a little deeper, and play with the edges of space? This one sounds a little more amorphous and a little harder to do, but what I have found is that when we can play with the edges of that space a little bit and let space take over, a lot of healing happens in those moments. So just linger a little longer in different moments. And it might even be the experience of lingering a little longer when you're, like resting. Okay, let me just rest a little bit longer. And maybe you fall asleep for 15 minutes and your body needed that healing. So lingering a little longer in those moments. And the third practice that I'm going to offer you is utilizing this idea of small, quick pivots to get you back to a baseline. So what I mean by that is sometimes if we think that so instead of it feeling like it has to be this really big, thing, like the other day I was like, oh, I think I probably pushed myself a little bit too hard or worked a little bit beyond my capacity. Instead of thinking, oh no, I'm going to fall back into a flare, or I'm going to go back to where I was, making a small, quick pivot to get back to a baseline. And a small, quick pivot can be just taking a moment to go take a breath, or do a little bit of tapping, tap on your chest, or to go, put the computer away for half an hour and just say, okay, I actually just need to like reset and come back to baseline in a small, quick pivot. And in this way, what we're doing is creating new grooves and pathways. So there's no pressure to get it perfect when you're going through this process. There's always time to pivot and to make a new choice, and creating those new grooves where your brain is usually wanting to go down the old pathways, we have to have a little bit of time and space and just practice to be able to create those new grooves. So I see it as making these small, quick pivots throughout the day to get you back to balance and to keep you steady. So those are my 3 practices that I'm going to offer up right now. If you work with those, I promise they will help you. They are very profound, even though that they are simple. So that is, yeah, that
Well,
is
just to reflect and just, I had no idea what Christina was going to say on any of this call today. So I'm learning right along with
mysterious.
You. You do like to, I love it. But, even just in the experience of taking notes and carrying a journal and thinking of it like a treasure hunt, tuning in a little bit longer and a little bit deeper and playing with the edges of space and utilizing this idea of small, quick pivots to get you back to a baseline. They all fit really beautifully together in a really lovely ecology. And that is something that we do talk about. I mean, our environment and how we're thinking about things play such a vital role in how we heal. Like, I would love for it to be like, oh, let's just take out eggs and we'll all be better. Like, it'd be great if that was the case, but it's actually, we really have to tend and get into the environment, and when each practice leads into the next, right? So even that idea of going on a treasure hunt and noting in your journal what you find, that can really come from tuning in a little bit longer. And that can really come from using our abilities to do a quick pivot to come back to baseline. So they all fit really beautifully together in any inner ecology. So it's, and I guess my thing, I don't know how to make it stop. That's okay. I guess I bring this up because it's, once you do one, the others will just, it seems like the others will really naturally just follow along.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. And and I hope that it is helpful for anyone that's needing something to grab onto right now, wherever you're at. Like I was sharing, these are what I've been thinking of as lessons from the fire. And why I wanted to share today while I'm kind of even still in process is because, when you're really close to something, it's easier to share kind of the like lesson that you're pulling from it. And when you get farther away from that, it's a little bit harder, to kind of access. So currently, being so close to this very, very deep, very tough, transformative experience. My hope is that if, it has been so helpful to keep me, afloat and buoyant, not only afloat and buoyant, but to be able to kind of alchemize a lot of this. And I'm so grateful for it, that if it can be helpful for anyone, that is my goal. So thank you for allowing me some space to share some of that. And I sincerely hope that it is helpful. And then if anyone has any questions or wants to explore other pieces of this, I could talk about this stuff for years. Or if anyone needs any help and support, please reach out to us. Reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help. And yeah, thanks for letting me share.
Thank you for sharing. I mean, it's your realness, your rawness, it will be helpful. Like, I can't imagine that it's not. So it's a real gift that you had the energy and the foresight and the ability to assimilate, digest, and bring forward your experience for others to benefit from.
Yes. And thank you. Thanks for being my supporter through all of this as well. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.